Live from Quito, Ecuador, I'm Soini Gray, and this is From the South, the afternoon news brief from Tell Us Your English. We start this new edition right now. Spain's Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy has given Catalan leaders until Monday to clarify whether or not they've declared independence. If they say they have, the Spanish government says they will have another 3 days to withdraw the declaration, or Madrid will suspend Catalonia's autonomy. Rajoy held an emergency cabinet meeting in Madrid to discuss the statement made by the Catalan president, Carles Puigdemont, on Tuesday. In that statement, the Catalan leader apparently declared independence and then suspended it to allow time for the negotiations with Madrid. Rajoy and his government say that if they do not get clarity, they will invoke Article 155 of the Spanish Constitution, which will effectively do away with Catalonia's autonomous status.
No one can have liked what happened on October 1st. No one can be happy or satisfied, either with the image shown or the farce of voting, and the very obvious manipulations aimed that day against the Spanish National Police and Civil Guard. None of this needed to happen, but the only ones responsible are those who were obsessed with carrying out this action, knowing it was absolutely unviable.
Our correspondent in Barcelona, Joan Ortiz, has the latest.
We already knew the government line, it's not going to change. Their stance is protected by democracy. But we also know that over 2 million radical Catalans who demanded independence stood in front of 47 million people. The 2 million people are practically a minority, which can do very little. At least that is what the government thinks, especially with the legal power that they have. Rajoy spoke to the parliament and said that it's up to Puigdemont to return everything to normal. He said that the Catalan president challenged the law and it has been a disloyal attack and that the referendum represented a breach of the Catalan statute. He went on to add that the laws are written according to the citizens' will as well as the constitution, and that it reflects what the population wants and that they have expressed it at the polls. As usual with Rajoy, said the government will not enter into any form of dialogue with Catalonia, especially if they continue to impose their independence, and even more so if they continue to question the unity of Spain. Rajoy went on to thank the police forces and civil guard due to the actions last week, and thinks that democracy cannot function without the law. He also remarked that the rise of international awareness in Spain is only due to the situation in Catalonia, but not because of the attacks in Barcelona on the 17th of August, before claiming that the world needs a future where everyone can be recognized without anyone feeling superior. Although, what was really remarkable was what was happening outside the Parliament building. Puigdemont posted a picture on Instagram of a chessboard with all of the pieces blurred except one, and an emoji of a sand clock alongside the Catalan Republic. The picture was in reference to a recent CNN interview with Puigdemont where he suggested that the Spanish government and the Catalan governments contribute 2 mediators, each for potential dialogue. Puigdemont also said that the Spanish state has to recognize the millions of people who demanded independence from Spain after his announcement yesterday. However, it looks as though nothing has changed, even though a declaration is close.
Thank you so much, Joanne, for that report. The fourth round of talks to revise the North American Free Trade Agreement is underway outside Washington, D.C. On the same day, the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has been meeting U.S. President Donald Trump at the White House. Trudeau is expected to try again to remind Trump of the trade pact's merits, but a series of contentious new U.S. demands could threaten the talks with collapse. From Washington, Trudeau is due to fly to Mexico for discussions with President Enrique Peña Nieto. As the renegotiation of the 23-year-old trade agreement becomes increasingly acrimonious, Mexico accuses U.S. President Donald Trump of spoiling for a protectionist war. The Mexican Foreign Minister Luis Videgaray warned lawmakers that NAFTA talks could lead to a breaking point in relations with the United States. He said Mexico is prepared to leave the NAFTA agreement if it has to. One U.S. business lobby group has accused the Trump administration of making a poison pill proposal to sabotage renegotiations.
What we can't allow is that a free trade agreement stops being for free trade. If red tape, restrictions, administration, tariffs and barriers are introduced, then this defeats the purpose of the agreement, and that doesn't suit Mexico. We have to be prepared to say no, and, if necessary, to walk out of the talks, and if necessary, we will leave the treaty. Mexico is bigger than NAFTA.
Our correspondent in Mexico, Pablo Perez, joins us now live from Mexico City. Pablo, thank you for joining us. What is Mexico's position now on the NAFTA negotiations?
Well, as you said, prior to the start of this fourth round of renegotiations, the Mexican Chancellor Luis Videgaray made some really straightforward statements. He said exactly what you said after, but he added that the negotiations are going to be done on the table with professional people, not on Twitter, which seems to be
that his rants and bullying on the social network are not going to take effect on Mexican government. Some specialists say that this is some way to show some
strength from the Mexican government, which has been accused from being too soft on Trump's presidency.
Okay, so what do the social movements in Mexico think about the NAFTA negotiations?
Well, it's been a long-standing position from especially the farmers and the people in the country that, the terms of the free trade agreement are not beneficial for corn producers here in Mexico because they cannot compete with the prices offered by producers in the States, which has forced a lot of them to move to the cities and to fall below the poverty line. So there are several social movements that are really against the NAFTA and will be really, really happy not only with a good renegotiation, but with Mexico leaving the treaty at all.
Thank you so much for that update, Pablo Perez. That was Pablo Perez in Mexico. More news in a minute. Stay with us. At least 13 people were killed when Mexican security forces tried to control a fight in a prison in the northern state of Nuevo León. 8 others were severely injured in the disturbance at the Catalonia prison. Local media say 250 inmates battled with security forces. The state government said lethal force had been used to regain full control of the facility, while anxious family members gathered outside of the prison to wait for news of their loved ones. In Tumaco, while the communities demand truth and justice for all the campesinos who were killed, the national government continues ahead with the forced eradication of illicit crops and the suppression of the campesinos who oppose it.
In the Puerto Rico municipality, campesinos continue with their peaceful demonstrations while they are still mourning those massacred by police. Helicopters fly over the territory, supporting the strong police presence on the ground. Residents don't understand how the forced eradication continues alongside the burial of their loved ones.
If we're mourning our people, if we're burying some of our comrades, why are they continuing to eliminate us? Where are the peace accords now? They should at least suspend the eradication operation while we can organize a substitution. But they shouldn't attack us, because we are going to go out again to confront the police to defend our rights.
There isn't a high school, nor any secondary school teacher in the Puerto Rico municipality. The children have basic education, where they are taught at this school, which was built by the community. It is the campesinos who pay the teachers with what little they have.
Instead of sending police or military forces, the Colombian president has to send teachers and care about the education of our children, who are already losing their education.
The majority of the population in this municipality depend on the cultivation of coca crops to survive, and many of them started to work when they were children. In this area, historic hunger, misery, and the lack of land push the community to work with the illegal crop.
We demand that the government do not abandon us. One way or another, we want to change the crops. We want to end working with the coca crops by ourselves. But they really need to keep what they signed in Havana. We need to continue cultivating the coca leaf because we need to survive from something.
Campesinos demand that the government start the substitution plan. That means to exchange the coca crops for food crops, for roads, which will allow them to sell their produce, and for opportunities to commercialize their products.
What the state is doing is crippling us. Instead of helping us or giving us what we need to live with dignity, they are trampling, attacking, killing, and eradicating us.
National government insists on the forced eradication, using violent means against the campesinos who are opposed to it. This is a struggle that has cost lives. This campesino remembers how he crossed the border last Thursday to escape to Ecuador so he could save himself and his partner, who was wounded by the anti-drug police.
They shot a comrade in his leg. We did our best to escape and ran directly to the border because we were surrounded. So the easiest way to cross was by the river. We came and we went to the hospital.
The state violence that the campesinos have been experiencing during the last few days has left uncertainty and fear among all in the community.
The political atmosphere in Ecuador is increasingly tense ahead of an expected announcement on new economic measures intended to boost the country's economy. Ian Bruce has the details.
Yes, anxious expectation. I think that's the best way of describing the mood here in Ecuador as we're waiting for the announcement by President Lenin Moreno of a major set of economic changes. Now, more or less taxes in Ecuador may not seem like major international news. So I think it's important to understand why this announcement is being seen as a watershed moment for this government just 5 months after it came into office. And why it's been seen as an indication of where Lenin Moreno wants to take the country, whether the path he wants to follow will be similar to or very different from that of the previous 10 years under President Rafael Correa, with what people call here his citizen revolution. Now, 2 weeks ago, Lenin Moreno held a series, as part of his national dialogue, held talks with the business sector here in Ecuador, business leaders who traditionally support the right-wing opposition in the country. And they made a series of proposals, 139 proposals for economic measures which they would like to see implemented. We don't know yet, that's what we're going to hear soon, we believe, which of these measures President Moreno has decided to accept. But we were told, or rather one of the business leaders told the press yesterday that he understood that Lenin Moreno had agreed to accept 86% of the 139 proposals. So what are these measures? I'm not going to go through all 139 of them, but I think we can single out three main areas. Firstly, taxes. The business sector, apparently almost 60 of the proposals have to do with reducing the tax burden on private businesses. Amongst those, one of the most important is the current system whereby private businesses have to pay part or all of the tax on their profits up front. They want that eliminated. It seems that President Moreno has not accepted that, but that he has agreed, probably we believe, to scale back that mechanism and agree to a number of the other proposals to reduce the tax burden on private businesses. Second area, the labour market, flexibility in the labour market. The business leaders want much more flexibility here. In fact, it does seem that the President Moreno has drawn a red line against reintroducing short-term, fixed-term contracts and zero-hour contracts. Those were both banned. They are currently banned. They were banned under President Correa. It doesn't seem he will accept that, but it does seem he will agree to other measures to introduce more flexible working hours. The third area, free trade. The business leaders want the government to negotiate a free trade deal with the United States. Now that, I think, is one area that would be politically very difficult indeed for the president to agree. All of this has to be understood in the context of a really quite bitter dispute between the current president, Lenin Moreno, and the previous president, Rafael Correa, who has said strongly that he feels that this current government is trying to undo many of the most progressive measures introduced during his 2 terms in office. And of course this also comes in the context of last week's major announcements or major events when the vice president, seen as close to President Rafael Correa, Jorge Glass, was jailed, given a preventive detention as he's investigated under corruption charges to do with the Odebrecht Brazilian construction group. And the second big event last week was the announcement of a plebiscite, a referendum by President Moreno to consult, and one of the key questions there has to do with presidential terms, which the supporters of President Correa see as a means to prevent Rafael Correa from ever standing for the president of Ecuador again. We'll bring you more from Quito when we hear exactly what the president has to say.
That was Ian Bruce with that report. But just under a week until regional elections in Venezuela, campaigning is reaching its climax. Electoral material is already being distributed to 23 states, heading to more than 13,500 voting centers.
This Sunday, more than 18 million Venezuelans are eligible for the vote that will see government and opposition dispute 23 states. Candidates use the last campaign days to display their political machinery. Campaign fairs and campaigning close this Friday. Opposition leaders are also calling their supporters to vote, including those who engaged in violent protests. Leaders of the Mud Coalition have been trying to convince these fringe supporters that the electorate is the new weapon. This after 4 months of violence left over 100 dead and hundreds more injured.
The Chavistas are not only struggling to maintain local governor positions in a completely unfavorable context. Right now, they hold 20 out of 23. It's not only about keeping them, because what is at stake is the country's stability. The opposition has already announced that wherever they win the elections, they're going to use the local government as a platform to oust the federal government. We have seen opposition municipalities doing this for several years. They use their institutions, their local police forces, to allow plunders and violent flashpoints. That's what we saw in the violent 120-day-long period that Venezuela just went through.
The government says the double standard of the opposition defies logic.
Those who participate in elections after repeating that they wouldn't, those who are going to allow the Electoral Council to count the ballots after saying the council was useless, those who neglect and insult Chavistas, now they look like little sheep saying, "Please vote for me, I'll help you."
Vota por mí, que yo te voy a ayudar.
Electoral Council, the CNE, says that opposition parties have all evaluated the election's audit processes. It's a move that contradicts the opposition's usual narrative to discredit the country's electoral process. Regan Devines for Telesu English in Caracas, Venezuela.
In London, the Venezuelan revolution continues to receive support from social and intellectual movements, especially when it comes to the severe threats from the United States government of a possible military intervention.
The media war against Venezuela in Europe is creating a one-sided view of the Latin American country that aims to discredit the government. This is summed up by what is not being spoken about by the mainstream media, such as the sanctions and armed threats by the United States government.
There's a number of 124 and they're happy to blame the government, to the security services, instead of investigating who killed who. And they also don't consider the opposition accusations and their people who have killed others who burned to death.
British intellectuals are interested to know the Venezuelan government side of the story when it relates to the months of protests that led up to the Constituent Assembly vote. They also denounced the severe threats from Donald Trump's administration.
The first is that Venezuela is an independent and sovereign country and has the right to pursue its own path domestically and internationally, just like any other country does. And secondly, that Donald Trump is threatening it. And Donald Trump is threatening countries all over the world, and all right-thinking people oppose it and come together to oppose it.
For 4 days, Venezuelan Foreign Minister Jorge Ariaza held meetings with political, social and union representatives with the sole purpose of strengthening relations between the people.
The British society is solitary and strong, beyond being from left, center or right wing. They are always going to denounce military interventionism or international rights violations like the unilateral economic sanctions. Because of that, we are joining forces and the imperialist politics of the United States are being reversed and we are winning more support.
When it comes to the interventionist pressures on Venezuela, this solidarity network in Europe continues to believe in dialogue as a solution to the threats and acts of violence from the Venezuelan opposition, in a country whose government is still calling for peace.
A Brazilian congressional report has recommended that President Michel Temer should not face trial on a second set of corruption charges involving the obstruction of justice and membership in a criminal organization. The report by Congressman Bonifacio de Andrade argued that the charges be shelved because they are, quote, unfounded. The charges still have to be voted on by the Constitution and Justice Committee of the lower house and in the full house. At the same time, Brazil's Supreme Court is ruling on a corruption case against Alceu Neves, a leader of the right-wing PSDB party. Our correspondent in Brasilia, Adriana Robrenio, has the details.
To take forward the charges against Michel Temer of obstruction of justice and criminal association, the lower house has to approve it. This Tuesday, the Justice and Constitution Committee rapporteur Bonifacio de Andrade from the PSDB party recommended the charges be shelved. He said that the evidence is weak and false and that the state prosecutor is trying to implicate him. Temer has already escaped earlier charges. These are the second set. He's working his way to get the votes he needs to free himself from these ones as well. He's doing this by naming public officials and using money from the state. Analysts say Temer is worn out politically and that he doesn't have the same support as a few months ago. That's why he needs to use even more of these strategies to remain in office. This contrasts with the situation on the streets, in which polls say that close to 90% of Brazilians want Temer to be investigated, and around 75% say they won't re-elect those lawmakers who now support shelving Temer's charges in 2018. Temer has become the first president in the history of Brazil who's denounced for penal action during his time in office. Now the next step is a voting inside the Constitution and Justice Committee of the lower house. Regardless of the result of that vote, another vote will take place in the plenary. This committee is in charge with the last word against the leader. For the leader to be investigated, at least 342 deputies should approve the charges. There's also the case of the former presidential candidate, Aseo Nieves, from the PSDB, one of the articulators of the impeachment. The coup that overthrew Dilma Rousseff in late September, the federal Supreme Court decided to remove him from his senator position and requested that he couldn't leave his house at night or have contact with the others implicated in this operation or leave the country. Aseo is accused of passive corruption and obstruction of justice. This case has raised controversy with over a sort of institutional crisis between the Supreme Court and the Senate, which argues that lawmakers can't be separated from their positions by judicial decision. According to the Constitution, a deputy can't go to jail unless he or she is caught in the act, and they say the current conditions of Aseo are similar to those of a prison. Lawyers and political parties like the PT claim that even while Aseo deserves the rejection of the population, the Constitution must be respected. Today, the Supreme Court is deciding whether senators and deputies can be removed from office through judicial measures, and if these measures can later be revised or reanalyzed by the Congress. This is the situation here in Brazil. Back to the studio.
Thank you so much, Adriana Robredo, for that report. And we'll be back very soon, so stay with us. Welcome back. The United Nations has accused the government of Myanmar of trying to remove from the country permanently its Rohingya Muslim minority. We have more in this report.
Bodies continue to line the shores of Bangladesh. The horrors of Myanmar's Rohingya refugee crisis show no signs of easing. Myanmar's state crackdown on its Muslim minority in Rakhine State has forced thousands to flee across the Bay of Bengal by boat. But boats capsizing have become all too frequent. Since violence began in late August, boat accidents have claimed the lives of an estimated 155 people. Survivors now in camps in Bangladesh recall their personal tragedies.
We were 7, my 3 kids, wife, 1 father-in-law, my mother, and me. Among them, I survived alone. We all faced so much difficulty for food and survival. They killed people and burnt down the villages, houses. We came here to save our lives.
In the latest accident, an estimated 12 people died. Hopes of reaching safety turned to tears, as shoreside burials become an all too common sight.
There were around 20 to 60 people, including the kids. We got on the boat at 6 p.m. We waited 10 days at the shore. When the boat arrived, we got on the boat. We got on the boat at 6 p.m. and it sailed for an hour until 7 p.m. and then the boat sank and my family died.
From Geneva, the United Nations has been compiling the evidence. It found that Myanmar's state forces planned and conducted a chilling operation.
The credible information collected also indicates that the Myanmar security forces purposely destroyed the property of the Rohingya population, scorched their dwellings and entire villages in northern Rakhine State, not only to drive the population out in droves, but also to prevent the fleeing Rohingya victims from returning to their homes.
The UN's findings reveal a calculated operation by Myanmar state forces to displace the Rohingya people. Although the crisis appears to have faded off the mainstream media's radar, the plight of Myanmar's Muslim minority will not go away anytime soon.
We've come to the end of this evening's news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website, telesurtv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. For Tell Us Your English, I am Soini Gray. Thank you so much for watching.